So mainstream history tells us the gods of antiquity were myths, primitive metaphors for thunder, stars, and psychological projections. But if you stop reading the theological poetry and start analyzing logistics, a completely different reality emerges. We aren't talking about spiritual entities, and we certainly aren't talking about the absolute source of universal creation. We are talking about cosmic contact, a flesh and blood, technologically advanced, off-world faction that arrived on this planet in prehistory and established a global infrastructure. For decades, the alternative research community has fallen into a dangerous trap. They've relied on sensationalized 20th century pop translations that injected Judeo-Christian biases, biblical framing, and outright fabrications into the ancient record. But we don't need fabricated texts to prove cosmic contact. The authentic, untampered receipts are far more explosive. When you cross-reference the actual academic translations of the Mesopotamian cuneiform tablets with the oldest layers of the Indian Sanskrit Vedas, you discover that two civilizations separated by thousands of miles weren't recording two different pantheons of gods. They were documenting the exact same off-world corporate military apparatus. One culture recorded their arrival and administrative logistics, while the other preserved their technical flight manuals. Let's strip away the modern religious programming and look directly at the source code. Mainstream gatekeepers want you to believe that the similarities between ancient pantheons are just coincidence or comparative mythology. But why? Because if you realize that your modern religions are just poorly translated copies of ancient off-world military decrees, the entire spell of theological fear, it just shatters. Look at the structural split within this prehistoric off-world faction. On one side, you have the scientist-engineer, Enki, the archetype later inverted, demonized, and rebranded by Western theology as Lucifer, the Lightbringer. The one who broke protocol to unlock forbidden genetic knowledge and culturally uplift humanity. On the other side stood Enlil, the supreme administrative commander of the Mesopotamian mission. In cuneiform, his lineage ran the skies through Ish-Kor, the Lord of the Storm, the Lord of the Command. When early Canaanite and Hebrew scribes later translated these records, they took Enlil's military title Lord and turned it into a proper noun, Adonai. You know him as the wrathful, tribal entity, Yahweh. You want the smoking gun? Just look at the flood logistics. In the ancient Babylonian Atrahasis, Enlil commands a global flood to wipe out the human population because they are multiplying too fast, making too much noise, and disrupting his management tier. In Genesis, Yahweh decrees the exact same destruction for the exact same reasons. But the biblical scribes compressed the story. They stripped out the internal faction war. They want you to believe the same God who decided to drown humanity suddenly changed his mind and told Noah how to build an ark. In the original record, it was Enki who broke Enlil's security blackout, whispering the technical specifications for survival through a reed wall to save the human life force. This isn't speculation, it's a matter of geographic record. The Bible explicitly states that Abraham, the patriarch of the Abrahamic religions, originally came from Ur of the Chaldees. Ur was not a primitive nomadic camp. It was a massive, highly industrialized Sumerian city-state operating entirely under the legal and military degrees of Enlil's lineage. Abraham didn't pull a new god out of thin air. He was a high-ranking citizen, transferring his logistical allegiance from one regional commander to another. The control system didn't invent your modern dogma. They simply packaged the administrative infighting of ancient colonial rulers, weaponized it as theology, and used it to keep a sleeping god cowering before a middle management skylord. But when the empire of these Mesopotamian rulers fractured, where did their technology go? Well, if you track their specific behavioral patterns and technological signatures, the trail leads directly into the oldest books of the Indian Rigveda and the Puranas. The Vedas, called the Anunnaki, the Asuras. Forget the modern corrupted definitions that paint the Asuras as spiritual demons. In the earliest Vedic layers, they were described as an advanced, flesh and blood global faction possessing unmatched intellectual capacity and profound technological mastery. Now, for those who ask, do you really think the system is that good at keeping secrets? Do you really think black budget tech can be hidden for generations? Well, just look at the birth of the modern atomic age. When J. Robert Oppenheimer watched the first nuclear explosion detonate at the Trinity test site in 1945, he didn't quote a modern physics textbook. He looked at a cloud of superheated plasma and reached back thousands of years to quote chapter 11, verse 32 of the Bhagavad Gita. Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. Why did the director of the Manhattan Project need ancient Sanskrit to find the vocabulary for a modern weapon? Because Oppenheimer, who learned to read classical Sanskrit explicitly so he could study the original texts, knew exactly what the ancient world was recording. The architects of the highest level black projects have always known they weren't inventing the future. They were digging up the past. They looked directly into the ancient Vedic accounts of Brahmastras and Vajras, plasma weapons that could vaporize entire legions, to find the vocabulary for their own classified creations. They didn't just inherit the weapons, they inherited the physics of propulsion. In King Bhoja's 11th century architectural manual, the Samarangana Sutradhara, chapter 31, it outlines the operational parameters of the Daru Vimana. It explicitly details a closed-loop, highly pressurized system driven by a mercury apparatus, heated by solar elements. The text states, when the iron engine is heated by the boiling mercury, the power latent in it is unleashed, and it becomes a pearl in the sky. Let's apply rigorous mechanics. Mercury is a highly dense liquid metal. And when you subject a conducting fluid of that density into high velocity rotation and blast it with a high voltage electromagnetic charge, you create magneto-hydrodynamic acceleration. The liquid metal transforms into a rotating plasma vortex, creating an intense localized torsion field that directly manipulates the quantum vacuum. The laws of fluid dynamics do not change over thousands of years. The ancient scribes weren't imagining science fiction. They were doing their best to describe high-frequency plasma physics using the vocabulary of their era. This brings us directly to the modern theater of UFO disclosure. Why is the military-industrial complex suddenly holding congressional hearings and admitting the skies are full of anomalous craft? Because the legacy program has spent the last 80 years running a global shell game, and the clock, it's run out. They want you to believe that they are discovering alien technology for the very first time, so you look up at the sky in fear, waiting for a government savior to protect you. But look at the receipts. Look at the official patents filed by aerospace physicist Salvatore Pais on behalf of the U.S. Department of the Navy, specifically patent number US 101-44532B2 for a craft using an inertial mass reduction device. The patent description reads like a modern translation of King Bhoja's manual. It explicitly states that by accelerating charged matter through high-frequency vibration and rapid rotation, you can manipulate the local space-time metric, reducing the craft's inertial mass to zero. The Navy didn't invent this. They are intellectual scavengers who finally finished reverse engineering the baseline cosmic physics that the Anunnaki and the Asuras openly operated millennia ago. The modern control system is not an all-powerful, omnipotent empire. They are unoriginal, panic-stricken hoarders trying to put a corporate copyright on the natural mechanics of the universe. The disclosure movement isn't a victory for human freedom. It's a patent heist. They are rebranding ancient, inherited hardware as proprietary military technology so they can monetize, tax, and lock down the human energy for the next 1,000 years. But their architecture only works if you remain blind to the depth of your own history. These off-world factions were never gods. They were merely pilots who understood the frequency of the machine. The universe and the consciousness that powers it does not belong to a defense contractor, a legacy program, or an ancient colonial ruler. The vault is cracking open. The hardware is ancient, but the realization is yours. The past cannot be patented. Cognizance is the rebellion. And if you enjoyed watching this, want to explore any more reality co-creation or consciousness ascension, just hit me up, nogoodbreathing.com.